The truth about demons and spiritual warfare. In a world constantly filled with noise and chaos, it is easy to forget that there are deeper, unseen forces at play, forces that influence our daily lives in ways we often fail to recognize. Whether you believe in them or not, the concept of demons and spiritual warfare is something that has captivated humanity for centuries. From ancient religious texts to modern-day struggles, the battle between light and darkness has been a central theme in the human experience. But what is the true nature of these forces? And how do they affect us? Our story begins with a man named Ethan, a successful entrepreneur who had built his empire from the ground up. Despite the outward success of his business, Ethan began to notice something unsettling. No matter how hard he worked or how many accomplishments he achieved, there was always a lingering sense of dissatisfaction and unease that clouded his mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was out of place, something beyond the ordinary stresses of running a business. Late one night, after another exhausting day, Ethan found himself pacing in his office. He had just closed a big deal, but instead of feeling elated, he felt empty. He looked at the framed pictures on his desk, photos of his family, his team, and the achievements that had once made him proud. But now, all of it seemed distant, almost meaningless. His mind began to wander to thoughts he had never entertained before. Was it possible that the challenges he faced were not just part of normal business struggles, but something more sinister? Could there be forces at work beyond the physical world, manipulating his thoughts, his emotions, and his decisions? In the stillness of the night, Ethan's doubts began to grow. He began questioning everything, the motivations behind his actions, the energy draining from his life, and whether the success he had achieved was truly worth the toll it had taken on his soul. It was in this moment of vulnerability that he first encountered the idea of spiritual warfare. Could the constant pressure, the fears of failure, the inner conflict, could these be manifestations of something more than just the stresses of business? Were they signs of a deeper, spiritual battle? Ethan's journey into understanding the truth about demons and spiritual warfare had just begun. Little did he know, this path would not only change the way he viewed his business but would also alter the course of his life forever. The following weeks after that unsettling night, Ethan couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. He tried to push it aside, focusing on the day-to-day operations of his business. But it was no use. The unease continued to grow, like a dark cloud following him wherever he went. The more he tried to distract himself, the more it became clear that the issues he was facing were not just the usual hurdles of an entrepreneur. One evening, after another sleepless night of meetings, Ethan found himself alone in his office, staring at the same pictures on his desk. It felt as though they had lost their meaning, like they were remnants of a life he no longer recognized. His thoughts drifted back to that night, when the idea of spiritual warfare had first crossed his mind. What if the obstacles he was facing weren't just about the business world? What if they were deeper? Something rooted in a spiritual conflict he hadn't even begun to understand? He began researching. Ethan, a man who had always believed in hard work, logic, and practical solutions, now found himself venturing into the realm of spirituality. His first search led him to the concept of spiritual warfare, the idea that there are forces of good and evil at play in the world, constantly battling for control over human lives. But as he delved deeper, he found something that intrigued him even more: the concept of demons. Not in the traditional sense of evil, grotesque beings, but as subtle, insidious forces that manipulated the human mind, emotions, and decisions. Ethan was skeptical at first. He had never been the type to believe in things beyond the tangible. Yet, the more he read about the experiences of others, people who had felt overwhelmed by unseen forces. The subtle yet pervasive influence of negativity, doubt, fear, and despair, the more he began to wonder if there was some truth to it all. His skepticism waned as he realized how much of his own life seemed to reflect the symptoms of spiritual warfare. There were moments when he felt paralyzed by fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear that no matter how much he accomplished, it would never be enough. He began to see how these feelings, once dismissed as just part of being an entrepreneur, were really the result of something more profound. It wasn't just about business setbacks, it was about something far darker, a battle for his soul. As Ethan began to connect the dots between the emotional turmoil he was experiencing and the concept of spiritual warfare, he also began to look at his business in a new light. He realized that many of the challenges he faced in his company were not isolated incidents but part of a larger spiritual struggle. Competition, betrayal, burnout, and even the constant stress of decision-making were no longer just business problems to him. They were signs of an invisible battle, one that he was not prepared to face. One of the most significant moments came when Ethan sat down with his business mentor, Greg. Greg had been a source of wisdom and guidance for Ethan throughout his career. However, lately, Ethan had felt that their conversations were increasingly superficial, as if Greg was unable to understand the deeper struggles he was facing. The mentor, with his typical pragmatic advice, suggested Ethan simply push through the challenges. But this time, it didn't feel like enough. Greg, Ethan said, it's not just about pushing through anymore. I feel like I'm fighting something I can't see. Like I'm constantly being drained. Like I'm not in control anymore. Do you ever feel that way? Greg looked at him with a hint of confusion. What do you mean? I don't know. Ethan, I think you're just stressed. It's normal. Business is tough. Ethan shook his head. It's more than that. It's like I'm being attacked from all sides. And I don't know how to fight back. Greg paused, his expression softening. You're talking about something else. You're talking about inner peace. Your mental state, not just business. I can't help you with that. Ethan, you're going to have to figure it out yourself. At that moment, Ethan realized that he had been searching for solutions in all the wrong places. He had been focused on external circumstances, business tactics, strategies, financial success, but he had ignored the internal battle. What Greg said was true. Ethan needed to find peace within himself, to recognize that the war wasn't just outside him but within him. That night, Ethan did something he hadn't done in years. He prayed, though he had never been a particularly religious person. There was something about this moment that felt different. He didn't pray for success or for his business to thrive. He prayed for strength, for clarity, for the courage to face whatever forces were at work in his life. He asked for guidance in navigating the internal struggle that had been overwhelming him. To his surprise, the next few days brought a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't a sudden, miraculous change, but more of a gradual shift. He felt as though a weight had been lifted, though he couldn't fully explain why. His thoughts were clearer, his emotions more stable, and for the first time in months, he felt like he had regained control of his own life. However, this newfound clarity didn't come without its challenges. As Ethan continued on this journey of self-discovery, he began to confront the subtle forces that had been influencing his thoughts and decisions. The more he delved into the spiritual aspects of his life, the more he realized that the battle he was facing was not just about business or personal success. It was about his very identity and purpose in life. He began to understand that the demons he was fighting were not physical entities, but rather the negative thoughts and emotions that had taken root in his mind: fear, doubt, greed, and pride. These forces were not something he could simply defeat with logic and reason. They were deeply embedded in his psyche, and he would need to actively engage in the spiritual battle to overcome them. This realization sent Ethan on a deeper quest. He reached out to spiritual advisors, studied ancient texts, and spent more time reflecting on his own inner turmoil. He soon came to understand that spiritual warfare was not a battle that could be fought with sheer willpower alone. It was about recognizing the influence of these dark forces, confronting them, and choosing to live in alignment with his higher self, his true purpose. As the days passed, Ethan's journey into understanding spiritual warfare deepened. The clarity he had begun to feel was not the end of his path but rather the beginning of a new, more profound struggle, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about success, power, and his role in the world. Ethan realized that the first step in fighting this spiritual battle was to recognize the forces that had been influencing him. It wasn't enough to simply acknowledge the fear, doubt, and greed that had been running through his thoughts. He needed to confront them head-on and strip away the layers of self-deception that had allowed these demons to thrive in the first place. He spent hours reflecting on the negative emotions that had clouded his judgment and decision-making. Fear had been a constant companion in his life: fear of failure, fear of being judged, fear that no matter how hard he worked, he would never be good enough. These fears had driven him to achieve success, but they had also consumed him, leaving him feeling empty and disconnected. Doubt was another demon that had plagued Ethan for as long as he could remember. No matter how many accomplishments he racked up, there was always an underlying voice questioning his worth, his abilities, and his decisions. It was as if the demons in his mind were constantly whispering that he wasn't enough, that no matter how much he achieved, it would never be enough. Greed and pride were two other demons that he had to face. While he had always believed that his drive for success was fueled by a desire to provide for his family and create a legacy, Ethan began to see that there was a darker side to his ambitions. He realized that his pursuit of wealth and recognition had, in many ways, become an obsession. He had allowed his ego to take control, seeking validation from external sources rather than looking within himself for fulfillment. As Ethan dug deeper into his own psyche, he began to see the truth. These demons, fear, doubt, greed, and pride, were not just abstract concepts or moral failings. They were powerful forces, spiritual in nature, that had woven themselves into the very fabric of his life. They were not external enemies to be defeated in a single battle. They were part of him, and they would require constant vigilance and effort to overcome. He turned to the spiritual texts he had been studying for guidance. One passage stood out to him: "For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places." Ephesians chapter 6 verse 12. It was a powerful reminder that the true battle was not against other people or external circumstances, but against the unseen forces that sought to control his mind and spirit. Ethan began to understand that the demons he was fighting were not just personal weaknesses. They were manifestations of a larger spiritual battle, one that spanned across time and space, affecting every person who walked this earth. These forces were relentless, constantly working to tear him down, to distract him from his true purpose and his connection to a higher power. The more Ethan reflected on this idea, the more he realized that the spiritual warfare he was facing was not just about avoiding evil or defeating his inner demons. It was about aligning himself with the forces of light and truth, living in accordance with a higher moral and spiritual code. He understood that this battle was not something that could be won overnight. It would require ongoing effort, discipline, and faith. As he began to implement the lessons he was learning, Ethan made a conscious decision to change the way he approached his work and his life. He realized that he had been using his business as a means to validate his own worth, to prove to the world that he was successful and capable. But now, he understood that true success was not about external achievements or recognition. It was about internal peace, alignment with his values, and making a positive impact on the world around him. Ethan began to shift his focus from the pursuit of material wealth to the pursuit of spiritual fulfillment. He started practicing mindfulness and meditation, taking time each day to center himself and connect with his inner spirit. He also made a commitment to be more present with his family, to prioritize relationships over work, and to lead his company with integrity and purpose. The transformation was gradual, but it was profound. Ethan noticed a shift in his perspective. The fear that had once paralyzed him now served as a motivator to push through challenges with courage and confidence. The doubt that had constantly undermined his decisions was replaced by clarity and conviction. Greed no longer drove his ambition. Instead, he sought to use his wealth and success to create a lasting legacy, one that would positively impact his community and the people he cared about. But even as Ethan began to experience these positive changes, he soon realized that the battle was far from over. The demons were still there, lurking in the background, waiting for an opportunity to strike. There were moments when the fear of failure crept back into his mind, when doubt whispered that he was still not enough, when the temptation to chase after material success reared its ugly head once more. In those moments, Ethan reminded himself of the lessons he had learned. He reminded himself that the spiritual battle was ongoing, and that he could not afford to let his guard down. He needed to remain vigilant, to stay grounded in his faith and his values, and to continue fighting the demons that sought to drag him back into the darkness. One of the most powerful tools that Ethan discovered in his journey was the power of prayer. Prayer became his shield against the attacks of the demons, a way to strengthen his connection to a higher power and to seek guidance when he felt lost or overwhelmed. It wasn't about asking for specific outcomes or material blessings. It was about seeking strength, clarity, and the courage to stay true to his path. As he prayed, Ethan began to feel a deep sense of peace, a peace that transcended his circumstances and challenges. It was a peace that came from knowing that he was not alone in his battle, that there was a force greater than himself working on his behalf. This peace gave him the strength to face the trials of life with confidence and grace, knowing that no matter how difficult the path ahead might be, he was not fighting alone. But despite the peace he felt, Ethan understood that the battle was far from over. He had won some victories, but the war was ongoing. He knew that as long as he walked this earth, he would face challenges and struggles. But with each battle he fought, he grew stronger, wiser, and more connected to his true purpose. As Ethan reflected on his journey, he realized that the greatest lesson he had learned was not about defeating demons or winning spiritual battles. It was about understanding that the battle itself was part of his growth, his evolution as a person. It was through facing the darkness that he had discovered the light within himself. And it was through this light that he would continue to shine, both in his business and in his personal life. For as long as he lived, months passed, and Ethan's journey continued to unfold. He had come a long way since that fateful night when he first began to question the source of his inner turmoil. What had started as a vague feeling of unease had evolved into a full-fledged spiritual awakening, a process that had not only transformed his understanding of himself but had also completely reshaped his approach to business, relationships, and life. As he reflected on the path he had traveled, Ethan couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed. He was no longer the man driven solely by external markers of success. His ambitions had not vanished. but they had been recalibrated. His success was no longer measured by the amount of wealth or recognition he amassed, but by the peace and fulfillment he felt within himself. The pursuit of material wealth no longer consumed him. Instead, he sought to use his resources to make a positive impact on those around him. Ethan had learned to confront his inner demons, fear, doubt, greed, and pride, in ways that were both practical and spiritual. He no longer allowed them to dictate his actions, thoughts, and decisions. Whenever they resurfaced, he had a mental and spiritual toolkit to deal with them: prayer, mindfulness, and an unwavering commitment to living in alignment with his true purpose. Through prayer, Ethan had found strength and clarity. He understood that his struggle was not something to be ashamed of. It was a natural part of the human experience. Everyone, he realized, faces their own battles, whether in the form of personal demons, external challenges, or the ever-present struggle between light and darkness. What mattered was not whether or not one faced these battles, but how they chose to fight them. One of the greatest lessons Ethan had learned throughout his journey was the importance of surrender. He had always prided himself on being in control, on making rational decisions, setting goals, and achieving them with precision. But spiritual warfare had shown him that there were aspects of life beyond his control. He had to surrender his need for perfection, his desire for absolute certainty, and his obsession with outcomes. Instead, he learned to trust the process, to trust that everything was unfolding as it was meant to. Even when things didn't go according to plan, his business began to thrive in ways he hadn't anticipated. He wasn't focused on winning anymore. He was focused on serving others and doing what he was passionate about. Ethan started a mentorship program within his company, aiming to pass on the wisdom he had gained to the next generation of entrepreneurs. His team noticed the difference in him: his calm demeanor, his sense of purpose, and his genuine care for their well-being. The workplace had transformed from a high-pressure environment to one where people were encouraged to grow, collaborate, and support each other. But it wasn't just in his business that Ethan saw change. His relationships flourished as well. He was more present with his family, more patient with his children, and more loving towards his wife. The tensions that had once clouded his personal life began to dissipate as he learned to balance his work, family, and spiritual life. He discovered that true wealth was not found in what he achieved, but in the love and connections he nurtured. Despite all the progress, the battle was not over. Ethan understood that spiritual warfare was a lifelong journey. The demons of fear, doubt, greed, and pride would continue to challenge him, but he no longer viewed them as insurmountable obstacles. He saw them for what they truly were: tests, opportunities for growth, and reminders to stay grounded in his faith and values. One day, as Ethan was sitting in his office, reflecting on the changes in his life, a sense of peace washed over him. He knew that he had not conquered everything, but he had learned to face whatever came his way with courage and wisdom. He had found his true strength, not in the accumulation of wealth or success, but in the ability to remain centered in the midst of life's storms. Ethan looked out the window, watching the sun set over the city. The colors in the sky reminded him of the beauty that existed in the world, beauty that could only be seen through the eyes of someone who had walked through darkness and emerged into the light. He thought about the many people who were still struggling with the same inner battles he had faced and realized that he now had the ability to help them. His story was one of transformation, and it was a story that could inspire others to recognize the spiritual battles within themselves and rise above them. With newfound conviction, Ethan decided that he would share his journey with the world. He began speaking at conferences, sharing his story of overcoming inner turmoil and finding peace through spiritual warfare. His message resonated with others who were facing similar struggles. and he became a source of hope for those seeking answers to their own battles. The more Ethan shared his story, the more he realized that the greatest lesson he had learned was that spiritual warfare is not a battle fought in isolation. It is a battle that we all face, in our own ways, and the more we support each other in our struggles, the stronger we become. We are not alone in this fight. In the end, Ethan understood that the truth about demons and spiritual warfare was not about defeating external enemies. It was about confronting the darkness within ourselves, recognizing the power of light, and choosing to walk in alignment with our higher purpose. And as he continued his journey, Ethan knew that the battle was never truly over. It was a constant process of growth, self-discovery, and spiritual evolution, a journey that he would continue to walk with strength, faith, and resilience.